Welcome to Life Science Marketing Radio, the podcast where marketing leaders inside and outside the sciences share their creative ideas and practical approaches to increasing your marketing ROI. Here's your host, Chris Connor.
Oliver Pearce is the VP, Head of Marketing at Epista Life Sciences. Oliver, welcome to Life Science Marketing Radio.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
All right, for context, let's tell the listeners a little bit about Epista Life Sciences so they know where you guys fit in the life science world, and then we'll talk about what our topic is today.
Yeah, absolutely. So a bit of context on Epista. So Epista Life Sciences is a life science consultancy and advisory firm that tackles consulting services and projects across a number of different domains within life sciences. We have expertise across the entire pharmaceutical value chain. So everything from clinical, quality, through to regulatory and even commercial. We have a large technology focus. So we have big partnerships with companies like Viva and others to help life science companies implement, configure, validate, support those types of tools as well. And like you said, I lead the marketing at Epista.
Nice. And we're going to talk a little bit about not so much trials, master files, but this community you created and more around that. And your experience in life science marketing that I think is going to resonate and educate our listeners. Because you didn't come from life sciences originally, right?
No. I mean, it's been 15 years now, but yeah, originally okay. I was my first area of focus as a marketer, I would say, was more on the event side. So strangely enough, started my life in sort of the somewhat interesting and dark world of nightlife events and hospitality. So when I was at university, I was running events, sort of different student events and things like that. And then, that's where I really cut my teeth, I would say, in terms of how to build a community around a specific event. And then about 13, 14 years ago, I jumped into life sciences and haven't looked back since. And I've since become a TMF person, which we'll get into, I'm sure.
Nice. All right. I want to say, like, you're not the only person I've met recently who's come from the nightlife world.
Okay.
So if there's anybody, who's young out here listening to this as a scientist or whatever, you're not sure what your career is going to be, it would not hurt to get some experience in events around nightlife. I mean, it would be a fun thing to do and a great way to learn a lot about marketing, but we'll get back to that at the end.
Yeah, for sure.
So you built a global community around trials master files, which are kind of the single source of truth as a clinical trial is happening. And you launched this online event called TMF Week from scratch. Tell us how you evolved from a webinar series to that major online event. Walk us through those pivotal decisions that made that happen.
Yeah, so like most or some great marketing ideas, it was sort of a happy accident that we sort of fell onto TMF Week, although at the time we were never going to let people know that it was an accident. I forget the exact year, but it was 5 or 6 years ago, so maybe it was 2019, 2020, something like that, where I was sitting down with my team to sort of think about what were some of the marketing activities that we were going to focus on, whether it was going to be physical events, webinars, the full sort of gambit. And we had traditionally run individual webinars on a sort of semi-regular basis. We'd done some series before, but nothing really at a large scale. And as we started to sit down, we started to think about what some of the topics we might want to discuss, and a lot of them are all related to trial master files, being that my previous organization was really focused on TMF and eTMF technology. And so, through a few different discussions, we started to plan out, okay, we're going to do one session here, and then 6 weeks later, we're going to do another session, and so on and so forth, running through a different, a common theme. And then we just sort of realized, well, maybe we should actually start condensing these together. Why should we wait 6 months until we can start to generate, interest, leads, awareness across these different topics? Why not sort of bring them closer together? And then right around that time was when COVID had hit the world. And a lot of the physical conferences that we had planned to go to were being cancelled. And so that sort of TMF community that existed, albeit small, didn't have anywhere to converse. And so that was sort of how we looked at this webinar series that we had and said, what about if we conducted all of these together? And then I said, well, what about if we did them all in 1 week? And originally, I think it was going to be 4 or 5 different sessions. And then as soon as we coined the term TMF week, it became a week-long event. And I think 25 different sessions with over 40 different speakers from life sciences. And what was really interesting about that was that people really came out in droves to support the event, the community itself. That was where we had a first glimpse of the potential of an event like that, because the people that were already speaking at physical events, or the other sort of influencers, let's say, that the subject matter experts, they came out and supported the event and said, yeah, we would be in, which is somewhat exceptional for, let's say, a vendor event, from a software provider. So, yeah, that's sort of how it began, but there's much more, I'm sure, to dig into.
Yeah, I mean, you have a little bit of a captive audience. I mean, people are now sent home, essentially, right? And, what are we going to do? But also quick thinking on your part to say, how can we squeeze this together? And then it just, as you say, went from 5 sessions to 40 sessions.
Yeah, so we had lots of different speakers, and I think once we had realized that it could be bigger than this sort of webinar series that we had planned to put together, we started to think about what we wanted the event to look like. And so in the first year, it was a little hacky, and we had spoken to a couple of different people that we already knew in the industry, some contacts that we had, tried to pull some sessions together. It was, a good balance of subjects that we were presenting as our company, and then we were bringing in other people to lead sessions. We started to put panels together, etc. And then when we had launched the event, interestingly, from a marketing perspective, maybe this is useful for marketers, is that we had sort of branded it sort of separate from Montrium, which was the company that I'd worked in before. Different color scheme, different brand altogether, because we felt like we needed to do that so that it would attract the right audience. But then over the course of the last, over the next few years, we slowly adapted and adjusted the brand and brought it closer to Montrium, and it became synonymous with the company at that point. So that was sort of a conscious decision. In our first year, because it was unbranded, we had lots of great uptick. We were fortunate that there were no other marketing events that were, or live TMF events that were happening in that time period because of COVID. And then, if you remember, there was a lot of this sort of, what can we all do to get together, right? So people were playing virtual board games and quiz nights and all that kind of stuff. And so it really fitted in with that culture that had happened online, where everybody was trying to stay connected. And we sort of were lucky and fortunate to be quick and fast. There were other physical conference providers that were trying to adapt their events for virtual, but we just so happened to have that conversation about turning the webinar series into an event, right when COVID was announced. And so it just worked out that way. And then we launched it, and it got to, I think, a few thousand followers, maybe a few thousand registrants. I think it was about 1,000 registrants. And we were like, wow, this is incredible. And then by the time, last year, I think it's 5,000 or 6,000 at that point.
Wow. Nice. I want to point out, the whole idea of an unbranded event and the value of that, because it sounds like over time people realize where it's coming from, right? They know who's behind it, I presume, at some point. They go, oh. But to start out, I think you cast a wider net by doing that. And when I worked at Varian, a company that no longer exists, they were bought by Agilent, and I don't know if this is still a thing, but They had an online dissolution community for anybody who made dissolution testing equipment for the pharma industry, but there was no variant branding on it at all. Everybody knew who it came from, but that made it a wide open community where anybody could come ask questions about any device they were using or procedures, because dissolution is the weirdest part of the whole life science chain I've ever seen, how specific things have to be to test how a pill dissolves. Anyway, but that, I think that buys some brand goodwill and just makes the point. You don't have to have your name on everything to have people know you're part of the community.
Right. And I think it helps initially, right, to be able to get something off the ground when what it ultimately allowed us to do was let the program speak for itself. And we had great speakers that continued to speak at future years, that came back year after year and presented on different topics. And, it's become now a bona fide feature in the calendar for that community, right? There are still physical events that people go to, but it's a key fixture. And that's something pretty cool. And we were able to build a community around that event that allowed us to springboard other branded events from, right? So we had launched podcasts, other live events, webinar series, etc., other content initiatives off the back of that event. We even launched a industry survey at that event because we had this captive community. So over the years, it really became a central fixture. And even though in the early years, the first sort of 2 or 3 years, it was non-branded or lightly branded, it still was the sort of, from a business perspective, it was still the largest contributor of pipeline and revenue to our business. It's where we often saw our first touch with a customer. It was often where we saw customers that were in pipeline were getting closer to our brand through that event. It's where we had our teams active in communication during that event. So it really became, a sort of a centerpiece to everything that we were doing. And, boy, was it an undertaking, right? To put together an event of that size. And, we were operating at the beginning with a team of 2. And over the years, we added a few, but the team never grew beyond 3 or 4. And the team I was working in will be doing it again this year, right? With a small team. So there's a huge amount of value that the business can bring. And I think what I learned and what we learned was that you can do big swings in marketing without necessarily having huge budgets. I mean, in the first year, we probably spent a few $1,000s, but it contributed, 10, 15, 20x that in terms of business impact. So I think, that's definitely a lesson from a marketing perspective, is that, sometimes great ideas are just great ideas and they just happen that way,
Yeah, I like it. There's so much there, and we're going to get on to sort of the branching out to podcasts and all the other content you can create from an event, and then those things carry on with a life of their own, I imagine.
Yeah.
I want to go back to talking about if there's more to say about how you were able to put this together quickly when the opportunity arose, or was that the accident that you're referring to, that we just happened to be talking about this and COVID comes along and you go, okay, we're just going to squeeze this thing down to a week and do everything we can with it?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a while ago, so I'm trying to remember the sequence of events and what decision was made first. But I think ultimately our initial objective was to build a series of webinars. And I remember in one meeting we said, well, why don't we just try and do them all, within a shorter period of time? And then the beginnings of TMF week were being discussed at that point. And yes, COVID sort of was the gasoline, the fuel, let's say, that helped us kind of accelerate that process. But I think in general it was sort of a bit of both, right? A little bit of happy accident, a little bit of great idea, or like random thought, let's say, that we walked down the road a little bit and it actually became something.
Yeah. So. Still a cool idea that you pull that together, and then you must have had to reach out to a lot of people to say, hey, do you want to participate with us? to get to those 25 sessions.
Yeah, exactly. It was, and we didn't have a huge audience at that point, right? Like we had done a couple webinars, they were fairly well attended, but nothing to a huge scale. And we had a small social following, small email database, that kind of stuff. But what was important, well, I guess important and necessary, was that we didn't have, big event platform software available to us because we didn't have the budget. We had a subscription to, at the time, GoToWebinar, or Zoom, or one of those sort of webinar tools that we were using. And we sort of hacked it together. We put together a landing page on our website. We, connected it to our CRM and created 25 individual events. So right at the beginning, if you were to register for the event, you'd get 25 calendar holes, 25 links to join sessions. So it probably wasn't a great experience for the attendee in terms of all of those things to go through. But we had good attendance at each of those sessions, which was good. And we sort of just hacked it together. And I think that was kind of part of its charm in a way, that it was sort of a little bit rough. And we were faster at getting the event to market because, like I said, there were some other conferences that existed in the market, right? Some in Europe, some in US that were specifically for trial master files. But these guys were trying to replicate a physical experience digitally. And we weren't trying to do that. We'd focused on the education, we'd focused on the topics, we'd focused on the speakers. We weren't focused on virtual exhibit halls or banners or advertising or one-to-one communication for sales reps. We weren't focused on any of that stuff because that wasn't our intention. We knew that we were going to get some brand recognition and some awareness from it. And we then knew that we could engage with interesting accounts at the end of it, once the event was over, if we wanted to try and see if there was a sales opportunity there. And I think that allowed us to launch a little faster than the others. So being first to market there probably helped a lot.
Yeah, nice. All right, let's talk about, you and I are on the same page regarding repurposing content from events, podcasts, and so on.
Yeah.
But you and I spoke before, and you mentioned the importance of crafting a strong narrative for the business. So that got my attention. How do you go about figuring out the narrative? I mean, I'm imagining it's different than a value prop, but
yeah, and that's I think a marketer's problem often, is that value proposition is a business term that we've heard for a very long time. And so lots of people in a business capacity, and even people that have gone through MBAs and business school and that kind of stuff, will have heard that term before. And it's often what an executive, a C-level, will ask a marketer, hey, we need to develop some value propositions. And those are useful, and there's lots of different ways to do them. But what is difficult about value propositions is that they're very one-dimensional. So they give you a value proposition. We do this for this company and do this outcome, right, as a value proposition. This is what makes us unique. But it has no storytelling to it, or very little storytelling to it. And so I'm not the person that coined the term strategic narrative. It's been around obviously for a long time. But what we've done and what I've done in my career is try to refine the process of developing what a strategic narrative is. So to me, a narrative is everything that your team uses to describe the market that you operate in, the problems that exist in that market that you solve for, how people should be working perhaps differently, how mindsets should be different, what points of view we have as an organization. These are all things that make up our narrative or our story. And so typically I'll go through the process of defining what is the shift that's either happening in the industry that we're connected to, or that needs to happen, so a call to arms. What is the impact of that shift in the industry? What specific insights can we gain from that specific shift that's happening? Is there a new approach? There often is, that's required to be able to tackle that new challenge. Why is it hard to take that new approach? And then how can we help them take that new approach, right? And so if you wrap all of that together and you go through this story, this narrative development, what you can do is create, often a document which is fairly detailed that covers the points that I just mentioned, and that can be used across the organization. So in the context of my organization, we're a consulting and advisory firm. A narrative can help inform service development, right, and delivery. How do we develop new service offerings? How do we deliver new service offerings? It can inform talk tracks for sales reps. It can inform sales decks, pitch decks. It can inform speaking at conferences and what people talk about there. It informs the marketing team on what content to create. It helps with personal branding. The benefits and the reach of a strategic narrative as a business are far greater than a value proposition or any other strategic messaging framework, in my opinion. I think that in the world that we work in today, where AI is so prevalent and content is everywhere, people care about stories and people, and often that's what a narrative helps us do.
Yeah. Okay. So is it fair to say, I mean, I think if people know about storytelling in the Joseph Conrad context, I think that's what you're hitting at. Mm-hmm. You have phrased those questions in a way that I've never heard before. Like, what is the shift and the call to arms, and, what do we solve and why is it hard? The obstacles and all those things. You've brought those things right down to the marketing level and made it very clear about, you frame it as a bunch of questions, which I love in marketing. I mean, I have a document I used to give out. I might give it out again. 52 questions that your customers want to know. And they're sort of generic, but you can kind of figure out what we're getting at. And if you did that, you'd have all the content you need. If you just think about what do they need to know. And there's a lot more than what does this thing that you're selling me do? Because they think about it bigger.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately, if you don't develop a narrative for your business or for your, area of the business, right? Because there's some, if businesses are doing lots of different things, developing one narrative for the whole business might just be too vague for the customer. And you need to get, more specific, and you go develop a narrative for your business area, right? But if you don't have one of those narratives, then you, by definition, are only going to be able to index towards, this is what I do, or this is what my product does. These are the features of that product, or the characteristics or the capabilities of my team. And this is the outcome that I can potentially deliver to you. And what's really crappy about that from a marketing perspective and from a business perspective is that there's very rarely anything unique about that. And so it's easily copyable in an industry where so many things are copied. A narrative is much more difficult to plagiarize, much more difficult to copy, because it's your voice as a business. It's what you say externally. And if you say it and you say it loud enough and you say it first, then anybody else that says it afterwards is just amplifying what you've said, not copying. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah.
That's why it's different, I think. And it's more impactful for the business to have that. And like I said, it becomes then a tool that the entire organization can use. Yeah, for me, I think VC firms, private equity firms, people that are investing in businesses in life sciences should be thinking about this. They should be asking, when they're looking at either investing in a company or they've already invested, what is the narrative of your business? What is the story you're trying to tell, and how does it connect to the business outcome that you're saying that you need to achieve?
Yeah, two things come to mind. One is that you're providing context around your value proposition. We solve this problem, but here's why it's important. Here's what's going on in the industry. All these things, and that leads me to my friend Brian Morgan. He's been on this podcast before. I recommend you go check that out. But he's a writing coach, but also a business coach that I work with. And in writing, he will say, no one cares what you think. I mean, you can say anything you want, whether people agree with it or not, but what they really want to know is why you think that. What did you see that makes you say that? And so that's what gets people's attention when they start to understand how you think about solving problems. That it's how you think about it, not what the solution is, that is sometimes more attractive to a customer.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the best narratives that you can develop for your business are the ones that are the most contrarian or polarizing, right? Because those are the things that in today's world are going to stop people from scrolling. Those are the things that are going to get people to look up from their phones when they're listening to a conference presentation. Those are the things that ultimately are going to get people to remember you and your business. And so, yeah, absolutely, I 100% agree with him. I think that you need to have something different to say in some cases. It doesn't all have to be different, right? Because if it's too different, then it's too pie in the sky and it's too difficult for people to understand. But if you can tie something that people accept as this is the way that we've always done it, it's a really great first step, is to sort of say, what do we think is stupid about the way that this group of people has worked forever? And if you start there, you'll be surprised at how far you can go with developing a series of opinions and perspectives that are going to stop people in the street, look up from their phone, stop them scrolling social media, whatever it is, and immediately that they're going to at least listen to the rest of your narrative, of your story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, and that's the key, is getting them to pay attention. You're probably going to, and this is also important in marketing, you're going to push away a number of people, but you don't have to look very hard online to find that everybody will take a side if you say something important.
Yeah.
And if you don't say anything important, no one's taking a side, which means they're scrolling past you.
And if people take a side, at a very minimum, they're involved in the conversation that you've started. And I think that that's pretty powerful. As a sort of just an underlying benefit of a narrative. And I think it's the biggest gap that I've seen in most organizations from I would call it a narrative, a business process to build, not just a marketing thing. I mean, this is something that I think is fundamental to the business.
I like the way you think about things. So since you brought it up, what do you think is stupid about the way life science marketing has been done?
Where do I start? I've had this
top two.
Yeah, I've had this rant publicly before, so there may be other people that have seen some of these things. But look, I think this is not just a life science thing. This is a marketing team, marketing department problem. But I think in general, marketing teams, we've struggled since there was such a thing as a marketing team in this sort of competition with sales. And why does sales always get invited to the party, and why does sales always get the attention they need? Because sales is what is seen as bringing in the dollars, and marketing is never really given the credit or the seat at the table that they need, because they don't align themselves with those objectives. They don't align themselves often with revenue or pipeline or something like that, right? So, marketing teams then are seen as sort of this fluffy team that does design and social media and all those things that people think you need to do, but they don't actually have a business impact. And, come talk to me when you bring some revenue in. And I think that has a significant impact on a marketing team's ability to do great marketing, because they just align themselves to, the wrong metrics. And that pushes them to do marketing for the sake of marketing, checkbox marketing, whatever you want to call it, random acts of marketing, all of the above. Whereas if you align yourself to pipeline and revenue, one, you fix the sales and marketing silo, I'm better than you, no, I'm better than you problem, and you also get a seat at the executive table that you can go and ask for more budget, more influence, more responsibility over the course of it. So I think that's one of the biggest problems. I'll pause there. I'm sure you have thoughts, but that's sort of like my biggest issue with life science marketing teams or marketing teams in general.
So, I mean, if I heard you correctly, you want to be measured on something that's relevant to sales, whether it's pipeline. Some people do,
or relevant to the business.
figure it. Okay. All right. What things would you say are relevant, that are essentially relevant? Like, I always think about like measuring awareness as a challenge, or the things we do, because a lot of companies are so focused on leads. We got to get more leads. But if all our activity is that, it seems to me that the names that come up every month, on your report are the same people that came to the webinar last month. And how do we find the people that aren't yet using our product that should?
Well, and that's the problem with measuring marketing based on those metrics, right? So we've seen it all, right? So marketing team will say, our objectives this year are to increase website visitors by 20%. Okay. So if my objective as a marketer is to increase website visitors by 20%, then I'm going to do everything in my power to increase the amount of people that come to my website.
Whether they're relevant or not.
Yeah, whether they're relevant or not. If I have an objective that I need to generate 1,000 leads or marketing qualified leads or whatever you want to call it, I'm going to do everything I can in my power to get 1,000 people to fill out a form. And what happens then is that most often, and I've made this mistake myself, right? So I'm not saying that I know more than anybody else. I've made these mistakes, and that's what I've seen, is that we hit our lead generation goal. So we generate 1,000 or 1,200 or 2,000 because we've created a webinar that gives away a ton of really great free content and everybody wanted a piece of it. But because everyone, or most of the people that were turning up to that webinar were just interested in the information, or they'd been to all the other webinars, like you said, they'd been there last month and the month before that and the month before that, there's not a relevant lead for sales. So marketing hits their goal, but sales misses their target. And if we don't align to the same objectives, then we're always going to be pitted against each other. And that's the fundamental issue, I think, with the way that marketing teams align today. If you give me a goal, I'm going to do everything in my power to align to that goal. So if a C-level or a VP or whoever is responsible for overseeing marketing doesn't set the right objectives, then you don't expect there to be different results, right? So, that's where my biggest issue is. If you say, marketing, I want you to go out there and generate X amount of pipeline and X amount of revenue, well, what am I going to go do? I'm going to try and work backwards and figure out today what is generating pipeline and revenue from a marketing perspective, and I'm going to index way more heavily on those activities and those tactics than I would if my goal is just to generate 1,000 people to attend a webinar. Because that's easy, by the way. Generating pipeline revenue, not so easy. And
right.
So you got to challenge marketers in the right way, otherwise they're just going to give you the wrong result.
So I want to know how you tie those things together. I mean, I like what you said there. Like, I'm going to challenge you to get X amount of pipeline and revenue and show me the activities that have in the past been most clearly tied to that and how you're doing more of that. Or do you have an even more direct measurement of how someone on your marketing team contributed to revenue?
There's lots of different ways, right? And I'm not saying that the only objective that marketing should have is to generate pipeline and revenue.
Sure.
Because you don't generate pipeline if you don't have a brand, or at least it's very difficult. So you need other objectives too. But if I'm thinking about how best to measure the impact of marketing, there is a pipeline objective, there is a revenue objective, but then there are also other ways to measure the success of those activities, because there are down funnel things that marketing does that impacts later on in the process. So, we might look at, from an attribution perspective, we are looking at specific events that we're putting on from a marketing perspective. Are they, instead of looking at how many people attended that event, we're looking now at how much pipeline was generated from it. And that might take us a little bit longer because maybe we have longer sales cycles. If we're dealing with enterprise deals, maybe they're 3, 6, etc. But we are able to look at the number of leads that are then turned into opportunities, and then the number of opportunities that turned into revenue, right? I think you can also start to look at the impact of other activities in the same way. And you can also use the rule of correlation. So you can look at things like, if marketing is doing these types of campaigns that perhaps are brand focused or other, are we seeing a downstream impact in the number of people that are coming to our website and requesting information, right? We can't track every interaction. We just can't. Yeah. But we can see a correlation between a bulk of activity or a program that we've launched and the downstream increase of a metric. So are we seeing branded search volume go up for our brand on Google or other search engines? If that's going up, that's an indication or a signal that this program is working. If we're looking at direct traffic to our website, that's an indication to me that some brand work is influencing to our website. And then if we look further down the funnel, we're going to be looking at how many high intent leads are we getting coming to our website. So people that are raising their hand and saying, I want to speak to a salesperson, is that increasing over time? So there are going to be direct ways to measure the impact of marketing, and there are going to be indirect ways to measure the influence of marketing. Yeah, that's nice. The way I would look at it.
Beautiful. All right, let's wrap up with this. So we teased your previous life in Nightlife. I just want to know what unique perspective that's been helpful to you that maybe other people could learn from your previous life.
My unique perspective.
What was the benefit for you specifically of working in that world?
Well, I think working in hospitality and events prior to working in B2B marketing, you have this real focus on how to rally a group of people. I think that's what I learned the most about events, is that ultimately you're trying to influence people to come through the doors of a physical event. And so you learn all of the tactics to be able to do that, and ultimately how to structure the product or the event so that it brings people through the door. It has the draw that's required. I think I also learned a huge amount about, I hate to use the word hustle, but about how you can try different things to get people to come to the event. I think that's really sort of solidified my thought process when I think about marketing, whether it be an event or a new program or a campaign. There's more than one way to do it, and sometimes you've got to throw a few things at the wall to see what sticks, and ultimately then you can look at what's worked and what hasn't worked.
Yeah, I imagine for someone, maybe if you're a big event concert promoter, you kind of know what you can get and you have access to huge numbers of things. But if you're doing smaller local events, you have no idea what the revenue in the end is going to be. So it teaches you to, and so your budget, you're going to be as conservative as possible to be a pretty scrappy marketer, like you say, trying different things and learning by actually making a lot of small tests and going, oh, all right, that works. What else can we try?
Right. Well, and that's the thing, right? Like, and to relate it back to what we were just talking about, which is like measuring based on the right objective, setting the right objective. So I think about, my previous life and managing events, something that was pretty commonplace was a guest list, right? We've all heard of guest lists. Guest lists are an event marketer's way to get someone to half commit to coming to an event. We can see that translate into my world today as someone that might register for a webinar, right? Or come to my website. But we would measure the success of the event not based on the number of people that were on the guest list. We would measure them by the number of people that walked through the door. And that's why it's important to align yourself to the right objective. If you align yourself to the objective that you actually really care about, that's going to say whether you do this event or not, or whether you continue with this marketing program or not. If you align to the right objective, at least you have a fighting chance of hitting it. If you align to the wrong one, then you're almost leaving it up to chance.
Yeah. Oliver Pearce, this has been fantastic. I mean, there's so many nuggets in here that I think people are going to get a ton of value from. So I want to thank you for taking the time today. This has been great.
Pleasure.
Hey, if you're still listening, that tells me you enjoyed the podcast. But don't tell me, tell your friends. And I'll be back soon with another episode. Okay, you can tell me too. Send an email, Chris at lifesciencemarketingradio.com. Bye-bye.